The voice outside my tent whispered my name so calmly that for a split second, I almost answered, until I remembered I had never told anyone at that campsite who I was. It was 3:11 a.m. when my eyes snapped open, heart already racing, like my body had sensed the danger before my mind did. The forest was completely still. No crickets. No wind. No distant laughter from other campers. Just silence so thick it felt pressed against my ears. Then the whisper came again. Clearer this time. Closer. My name. Not shouted. Not panicked. Not playful. It was slow and careful, like whoever said it didn't want to scare me awake, only confirm that I was. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, staring at the dark curve of the tent ceiling, afraid that even breathing too loudly would give something away. My thoughts collided in panic. Maybe it's one of my friends. But that excuse collapsed instantly. My friends were asleep in their own tents, and none of them used my full name. No one ever did. A soft sound followed. Footsteps. Not heavy. Not rushed. They shifted slightly in the dirt and leaves, stopping just inches from my head on the other side of the tent wall. Whoever was out there wasn't walking past. They were standing still, listening. My mouth went dry. I could feel my pulse in my neck, loud enough that I was sure it could be heard outside. Every horror story I'd ever laughed at suddenly felt uncomfortably real. The thin fabric of the tent no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a suggestion. I thought about unzipping the tent. That idea died instantly, because something about the way my name had been said felt wrong. Too precise. Too familiar. As if it had been practiced. As if whoever or whatever was out there had been waiting for the exact right moment to use it. Another whisper followed, barely louder than breath. Hey! My stomach dropped. That wasn't curiosity. That wasn't confusion. That was an invitation. The footsteps shifted again, slow and deliberate, circling the tent. Leaves crunched softly. The sound of fabric brushing against fabric told me something had leaned closer, pressing just enough to test the barrier between us. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart slamming against my ribs, and one horrifying thought pushed through everything else. This didn't just walk into our campsite. It had known exactly where my tent was. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, a sick joke, a camper who'd had too much to drink. But none of those explanations could account for the way the forest itself felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. No animals moved. No wind stirred the trees. Even the air felt heavy, charged, expectant. The whisper came one last time, so close that it sounded like it brushed the tent fabric. I know you're awake. That was the moment fear stopped being abstract. Because whoever stood outside wasn't guessing. They weren't hoping. They knew. And as I lay there, paralyzed by terror, one thought burned through my mind with absolute clarity. If I answered, something terrible was going to happen. And that was only the first night. Before that night, camping was one of the few things in my life that still felt uncomplicated. I'm not an adrenaline junkie or a thrill seeker. I work a regular weekday job, spend too much time indoors, and most of my stress comes from emails and deadlines, not real danger. That's why getting outside always felt like a reset. That trip was supposed to be exactly that. 3 friends and I planned a long weekend at a well-known state campground a few hours from the city. It wasn't remote wilderness or some off-the-map location. It was popular, maintained, and considered safe enough that families brought kids there every summer. Cell service was spotty, but there were rangers, marked trails, and numbered campsites. We arrived in the early evening, just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. By the time we parked and unloaded the car, the campground was glowing in that calm end-of-day light. Smoke drifted lazily from nearby fire pits. A few people waved as they walked past with flashlights and coolers. Felt familiar. Comfortable. We set up our tents side by side, laughing as one of my friends struggled with the poles. Someone put music on quietly. Another started preparing dinner on a small camp stove. The forest around us felt calm and open, not threatening at all, just tall trees, dry leaves, and the distant sound of a lake. After we ate, we sat around the fire talking about nothing important. Work stories, old jokes, plans for the next day's hike. The kind of conversations you only have when there's nowhere else to be and no clock to watch. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was just after 9:30 p.m. The sky was clear, stars sharp and bright overhead. The air was cool but comfortable, the kind that makes you pull your jacket tighter without shivering. Everything felt exactly how a camping trip is supposed to feel. Around 10:45 we decided to turn in. The campground had quiet hours, and most of the nearby sites were already dark. We put out the fire carefully, making sure it was completely dead, and did a quick walk around to make sure no food was left out. I crawled into my tent with a flashlight and my phone, feeling tired in a good way. The ground was firm but familiar beneath the sleeping bag. The fabric rustled softly as I shifted into a comfortable position. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't on edge. I felt safe. I remember scrolling through a few messages, smiling to myself and setting my phone aside. I zipped the tent shut and turned off the flashlight. Darkness settled in, gentle and expected. The last thing I remember thinking before falling asleep was how quiet and peaceful everything was. Just a normal night in a normal campground. Nothing unusual. Nothing threatening. Nothing at all to suggest that by morning, I'd wish I'd never gone there in the first place. I don't know exactly when I woke up. There was no sudden noise, no sharp jolt of fear. It felt more like drifting slowly back to the surface after being pulled under. My eyes opened to darkness, and for a few seconds, everything felt exactly the way it should have. Then I noticed the quiet. It wasn't the peaceful kind I'd fallen asleep to. It was thinner, tighter, like something had been removed from the night without explanation. I listened, expecting to hear the usual background sounds of the campground, someone coughing in the distance, a zipper opening, the soft hum of wind through the trees. There was nothing. I lay still, my breath slow, ears straining. The fabric of the tent glowed faintly from starlight, barely enough to make out shapes. My sleeping bag felt colder than it had earlier. The air inside the tent carrying a sharp edge I didn't remember. A faint sound reached me from somewhere nearby. First I couldn't place it. It was subtle, almost easy to miss. A light brushing noise like leaves being shifted gently aside. I told myself it was an animal passing through the campsite. Raccoons were common. So were deer. The sound came again. Closer. It wasn't hurried. It didn't scurry or stop suddenly the way animals do. It moved with intention, slow and measured, as if whoever or whatever was taking each step wanted to avoid drawing attention. I shifted slightly inside my sleeping bag. The sound stopped. That's when the unease began to settle in. Heavy and uncomfortable. I stayed perfectly still, counting my breaths, listening for any sign that it would move on. Seconds stretched. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. Then the sound resumed. This time it was right beside the tent. I could hear the faint crunch of dirt under weight, the soft compression of leaves. Something was standing very close, close enough that the thin tent wall no longer felt like enough of a barrier. A strange sensation washed over me. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. Not in a dramatic way. Not like someone staring openly. It felt more restrained, like attention focused carefully in one direction. On me. I told myself not to panic. Campgrounds attract curious people. Maybe someone had wandered too close in the dark. Maybe a ranger was checking sites quietly. There were explanations, even if none of them felt quite right. The temperature seemed to drop again. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders, suddenly aware of how still the air felt. Even the trees outside seemed frozen, branches unmoving against the sky. A faint shadow passed over the tent fabric. Not sharp, just enough to darken it slightly, like something tall moving between me and the stars. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I didn't reach for my flashlight. I listened. There was a soft exhale outside, barely audible. Controlled. Close. It lingered near my head, then drifted slowly away, circling. My thoughts raced, but none of them formed into anything solid. Nothing clearly dangerous had happened. No sudden movements. No voices. No threats. Just sounds. Small changes. A growing awareness that the night around me no longer felt empty. The feeling of being watched didn't fade. Settled in. And for the first time since we'd arrived at the campground, I found myself hoping desperately that whatever was outside would lose interest and leave. Because something told me deep down that if it didn't, this night was going to change everything. I finally moved. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my flashlight, my fingers clumsy with tension. The moment I touched it, the pressure outside the tent changed, subtle but undeniable. Like whatever had been circling me noticed the shift. I froze again. The forest felt heavier now. Not quieter, heavier. The air inside the tent seemed thick, hard to breathe. As if something unseen had stepped closer and pulled the night in around it. My ears rang faintly, and my skin prickled with a deep, instinctive warning. Then the tent wall moved. Not from wind. Not from something brushing past. It pressed inward. Just slightly. Enough to stretch the fabric near my head. My heart slammed so hard I felt dizzy. I stared at that small distortion, my mind scrambling for explanations that fell apart the instant they formed. A person stumbling? No footsteps. An animal leaning in? Animals don't pause like that. They don't test. The pressure eased, then returned. Lower this time. A shape began to form against the tent wall, tall and narrow, blocking out the faint starlight behind it. The outline didn't move the way a human silhouette should. It leaned in at an angle that made my stomach drop, as if the joints beneath the shape weren't bending correctly. I whispered my friend's name, barely louder than breath. No answer. The shadow shifted again, and that's when I saw it clearly. A hand, pressed flat against the tent fabric. The fingers were too long. The spacing wrong. They spread slowly, deliberately, as if whoever owned them was learning the shape of my shelter by touch alone. The fabric stretched thin under the pressure. I couldn't breathe. The atmosphere collapsed in on itself. Every sound felt amplified, the pounding of my heart, the soft rustle of fabric, the faint creak of nearby trees. The forest no longer felt open or distant. It felt close. Crowded. The hand slid downward, dragging along the tent wall, stopping inches from where my face would have been on the other side. The shape leaned closer, close enough that I could hear breathing now. Slow. Controlled. Almost curious. That was the moment my fear sharpened into something else entirely. This wasn't someone lost. This wasn't a prank. This thing wasn't afraid of us. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on, shining it directly at the shadow. The sudden burst of light sent it recoiling, not retreating, just pulling back slightly, like it hadn't expected resistance. For a split second, the fabric thinned enough for me to see through it, and I saw its face, or what passed for one. Pale. Too smooth. The features indistinct, as if they didn't quite belong together. The eyes were the worst part, set too far apart, reflecting the light without blinking, locked directly onto mine. The flashlight flickered. The shadow straightened to its full height, towering over the tent. The forest seemed to respond, branches creaked, leaves rustled all at once, like the woods itself had shifted. Then my name came again. Clear. Perfect. Right outside the tent. That was when urgency hit like a physical blow. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being addressed. And whatever stood outside wasn't going to leave on its own. It had found me. And it wanted me to respond. I screamed. The sound tore out of me before I could stop it. Raw and panicked, ripping through the stillness of the forest. At the same time, I kicked backward in my sleeping bag and fumbled for the tent zipper with shaking hands. Outside, everything exploded into motion. The shadow lurched. The hand vanished from the tent wall, replaced by sudden movement. Fast, violent, unmistakably close. The fabric rattled as something circled the tent in a blur. Footsteps pounding the ground now. No longer careful, no longer hiding. I tore the zipper down and crawled out, half falling onto the dirt. Wake up! I screamed again, scrambling to my feet. Flashlights snapped on across the campsite. My friends shouted, confused and terrified, crawling out of their tents just as something tall and dark darted past the edge of the fire pit. I saw it clearly this time. Too tall. Too thin. Moving wrong. It didn't run the way a person runs. It glided, covering ground in long, unnatural strides, circling us just beyond the reach of our lights. "What is that?" someone yelled. None of us answered. My heart slammed so hard I felt sick. Adrenaline drowned everything, thoughts, fear, pain, leaving only instinct. One of my friends grabbed the bear spray from the table, hands shaking, finger hovering uselessly over the trigger. The thing rushed in. Fast. Branches snapped. Leaves exploded under its weight. It crossed the edge of the firelight in a heartbeat, and the temperature dropped instantly, like the warmth was being sucked out of the air. I ran. Not toward the tents, away from them. Toward the trees. I don't know why. Maybe panic. Maybe instinct. Maybe something in me knew staying together made us easier to surround. Behind me I heard screaming. Footsteps. Someone tripping. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The forest swallowed me whole, branches tearing at my arms, roots grabbing my feet. Something chased me. Close. I could hear it breathing now, fast, uneven, excited. The sound wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from everywhere. I stumbled and hit the ground hard, knocking the air from my lungs. Pain flared through my shoulder. I rolled just as something passed over where my head had been seconds earlier. I saw its legs. Bent wrong. Too many joints. I screamed again and crawled blindly, hands digging into dirt and leaves, until my fingers closed around something solid. A fallen log. I shoved myself behind it and curled in tight, covering my mouth with both hands. Footsteps stopped. The forest went silent. I lay there shaking, eyes burning, chest aching, convinced that if I moved even an inch, it would know exactly where I was. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then shouting. My friends' voices. The thing pulled away, retreating into the darkness without a sound. No crashing. No running. Just gone. I stayed hidden until flashlight beams cut through the trees and hands grabbed my shoulders, pulling me up. We ran together this time, straight out of the forest and onto the dirt road leading to the ranger station. None of us stopped running until the lights of the campground office came into view. Only then did I realize how close I'd come to not making it out at all. Because whatever chased me hadn't missed. It had let me go. The ranger station lights felt unreal. Too bright. Too normal. We burst through the doors shouting over each other, words tangled and useless. A ranger grabbed the radio, another tried to calm us down, and someone handed me a paper cup of water that shook so badly in my hands that most of it spilled onto the floor. They asked questions. What did it look like? How tall? Was it a person? Was anyone hurt? None of us gave the same answers. Every explanation sounded wrong the moment it left our mouths. The rangers exchanged looks that made my stomach twist. Not fear, not disbelief, but something closer to tired concern. They drove us back to the campsite with floodlights and radios. The forest looked smaller in the harsh beams, stripped of shadows and mystery. It should have felt safer. It didn't. Our campsite was untouched. No torn tents. No footprints. No broken branches where something large had moved through. The ranger crouched near my tent, running a hand over the fabric where the handprint should have been. There was nothing there. Not even a smudge. They searched the surrounding trees for nearly an hour. Found nothing. No tracks. No signs of animals. No evidence of another camper nearby. Eventually, they told us what people always say in situations like that. You were tired. It was dark. Fear can make things feel real. They offered to let us stay the night at a nearby lodge, but none of us wanted to sleep. Not there, not anywhere near the woods. We packed up in silence, our movements rushed and clumsy, and drove away before dawn. The sun was just beginning to rise when we reached the highway. In the daylight, everything felt distant. Like a bad dream dissolving with the morning. My friends talked quietly, trying to piece together what happened, laughing nervously at how ridiculous it sounded when said out loud. I didn't join in, because something didn't fit. When I finally got home, I emptied my backpack onto the floor. Dirt fell out. Leaves. A torn glove. Normal things. I sat there staring at the pile for a long time, waiting for the tension to fade. It didn't. That night as I changed clothes, I noticed something on my arm. Long faint marks, parallel lines running just below my elbow. Not scratches. Not deep enough. Like pressure marks that had lingered too long. I don't remember being grabbed. I took a photo anyway. A week later, I checked the campground's website. The page for our site number was gone. Not marked as closed. Not under maintenance. Just gone. I emailed the park office. They never replied. Sometimes late at night I wake up with the same feeling I had in that tent, the sense that the quiet has thinned, that something is listening too closely. I don't camp anymore. I don't sleep with my windows open. And every once in a while, just as I'm drifting off, I hear my name spoken softly from somewhere nearby. The worst part isn't that it sounds wrong. It's that it sounds exactly like me.